Well, how a load of footballers allegedly, this is all allegedly, were the victims of financial crime and exploited. Because I think that footballers and doctors have some things in common which make us especially vulnerable to allegedly unscrupulous advice. So and I want to brainstorm it with you guys here. Okay, so it's called the V11 scandal, and essentially it refers to an alleged keeping the lawyers happy here, financial fraud case that impacted a group of Premier League footballers who have been estimated to lose £100 million. And if you're of a certain age like me, you will remember the formation of the Premier League, which was in 1992. I actually had the 1992 Premier League sticker book, like those books where you had the whole team and then you had to collect the stickers and eventually you got like the whole book completed. I didn't complete it. I only ever did about 2 packs because they were like really expensive. But it affects some legends of that era, like Danny Murphy, Michael Thomas, Brian Dean. So if you're of that era, that's who's affected. And essentially, I think there's a documentary on BBC which I watched, and I took some notes, and I thought about how did these guys allegedly fall victim to the financial crime, allegedly, and how could doctors be the same? Because in a way, doctors and footballers are quite similar in that footballers get paid a lot of money to be good at football, and you can therefore make a lot of money as a footballer and not understand anything at all about finances and how to make money. Okay, contrast that with a small business owner, where to run a small business, you need to know a little bit about finances, or a lot, ideally. So footballers are kind of uniquely vulnerable in that sense. They earn a lot of money, but they don't actually, or some of them don't understand it, and probably that's because they weren't taught about it. At a slightly different earnings level, of course, but I think there's a parallel with doctors there. Doctors get paid to help people and make them better, and that is absolutely nothing to do with being good with making your money, contrast to a small business owner. And so I think that one reason that these footballers allegedly were victim of this crime is huge information asymmetry. So the footballers didn't really understand what they were getting into by their own admission. And of course, that's allegedly. And I think, a lot of doctors don't understand much about their finances. We just completed our survey of over 6,000 doctors at the State of Medics Money. We did a podcast on it a few weeks ago. And it's very, very obvious from that, unfortunately, that despite our best efforts here at Medics Money, there's still a ton of doctors who do not understand their finances. So I think that's the first thing about make you pretty vulnerable to this kind of thing. Information asymmetry. The advisors know a lot. You don't know much. You just go along with the flow, allegedly. And that's kind of how it all started. The second really obvious red. Do you want to comment on that, anyone?
Yeah, I mean, I think also the problem was, from watching that documentary, it was these footballers were also sort of recommended the firms that were, doing these investments by their managers and their sort of senior people. So there was a whole industry going on around it in terms of recommending to use certain firms.
You literally stole one of my points from later on. So let's get to that. But I think the other red flag for me was promises of high returns with minimal risk. So high returns and risk are usually correlated for a reason. So if somebody promises you exceptional returns, zero risk, that should make your sort of senses prick up and think, hold on a minute, something might be going on here. So, they were promised high returns, allegedly with minimal risk. In fact, these investment schemes were super complex, film financing, foreign property adventures, and they were often sort of proposed as super complex tax mitigating schemes, which may or may not have been turned out to be misleading. But high returns, minimal risk, that is a red flag for me. And occasionally we get someone email Medics Money and say, what do you think about this property investment? They're guaranteeing 20% returns for the next 3 years, and I only have to put this amount in. I think any mention of guaranteed returns should be a red flag. Discuss.
Well, nothing's going to be guaranteed in perpetuity. You can obviously have guaranteed returns in the very short term because someone can fund that. But, beyond that, then you're exposed to the full risk. And I don't think anything, whilst they might guarantee you'll get an income return of maybe for 1 or 2 years, that doesn't guarantee the capital is worth what it's worth. So, yeah. don't think.
Good point. Yeah. Okay. The next red flag for me, which is what Andy mentioned, a lot of these footballers allegedly found their advisors from word of mouth referrals and an endorsement from something called the League Managers Association. And so you're thinking, well, what is the problem with a word of mouth referral? And I think the problem with a word of mouth referral is if the person who is referring you completely understands the whole thing and is an expert in that field, then great. Word of mouth referral, happy days. But, way back when me and Ed started Medics Money, the two problems that we wanted to overcome was one, doctors didn't get any financial education. And two, most financial advisors do not understand doctors. And a lot of doctors are using and still are using financial advisors that as we would never use ourselves and we would never recommend anyone else use. And a lot of those advisors come from word of mouth. They ask another doctor at work, oh, what's your financial advisor like? They're amazing. They give me free tickets to the football and my returns have been amazing. Guess who's paying for those free tickets to the football? Your excess fees. And are your returns amazing? Have you benchmarked them? Do you actually know what amazing returns look like? So word of mouth referrals was a big factor in this, I think. And then the second thing was kind of following on from that, endorsement from the League Managers Association. So I'm going to assume that the League Managers Association know a ton about football. And so if the League Managers Association recommends me what is the best football boots to wear, I'm going to think, yeah, they probably do know a lot about that. But I'm going to suggest that allegedly, maybe the League Managers Association doesn't know that much about complex film financing schemes. And yet they endorsed some of these advisors, official endorsements. And we see this all the time as doctors. We see med schools endorsing advisors. We see Royal Colleges endorsing advisors. And some of these advisors are great. And some of them we wouldn't recommend to our worst enemy. So if you're going to take a word of mouth referral from someone, understand that they are an expert in that subject, okay? And if they're not an expert in that subject, I think you've got to do your own research and don't just blindly follow, which unfortunately seems to be the case for these football managers. And I know is definitely the case for doctors. Discuss.
I think I'd say, sorry, Andy, I know you're about to speak there, but I'd say I think word of mouth recommendations from your friends and for these bodies, I think it can definitely have its place. But I think really with all these things, everyone should employ a bit of skepticism and do their own research, because what's good for one person might definitely not be good for someone else. So I don't think word of mouth is always terrible, which obviously wasn't what you're saying, Tommy, but it's not always terrible. But yeah, you definitely should always do your own research, have your own thoughts as to what exactly is right for yourselves. That's my 2 pence.